Linda Sanchez and I'm Congressman Joe Crowley, the chair of the Democratic Caucus with the vice chair of the Democratic Caucus, Linda Sanchez. This is really our debut. You can say maybe our inauguration in many respects. And I just want to say what a massive crowd of the press we have here today. It is enormous. It is probably, in all likelihood, I think, the largest on record, although Javier Becerra is already disputing that. He says he has pictures, but from where I can sit or stand at this point, I count at least 95 cameras. Wouldn't you say, Linda, 95 cameras or so that are here today? That's my interpretation, and if I say it, it must be true. So thank you all very much for being here. On a serious note, though, President Trump spent his first days in office obsessing over trivial nonsense and wielding the power of the presidency to attack women's health, ignore basic campaign promises. That's not an encouraging sign for any of us over the next 4 years. And it's not just President Trump. Congressional Republicans and their leadership are also focusing this week on furthering their attacks on women's health. Instead of voting on legislation that would help grow families and their paychecks or give Americans better access to health care, we will be relitigating the woman's right to choose in our nation. This is not how we should be spending our time here in Congress. Compare the actions from Republicans and President Trump to House Democrats, who met this morning to discuss the proactive ways we plan to grow the economy and support working families in America. We also discussed our efforts to defend the Affordable Care Act and prevent Republicans from taking health care away from millions of Americans. We have our work cut out for us, there's no question, but we're prepared to fight every inch of the way to ensure we maintain health care for every American who had been denied it in the past and to further expand opportunities for health care coverage for those who still need it. So with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague and good friend and my codifier and the observation of just how enormous this press conference is this morning. Linda Sanchez.
Thank you, Joe, and good morning to all of you. We just came from a caucus meeting in which we discussed several topics that are of concern to the Democrats here. We are trying to fight to make sure that American families have access to affordable health care coverage that is more than just catastrophic coverage, that has certain safeguards in place so that their plans will be there when they need them. It's been 6 years and 10 months since the Affordable Care Act was signed into law. And in all that time, Republicans have held more than 65 votes to repeal the ACA completely. They've pushed out lies and myths about what the law really does. But the truth of the matter is that after 7 years, Republicans still have not come up with a credible or viable alternative. Yesterday, Republican Senators Bill Cassidy and Susan Collins put out a proposal that would cover fewer Americans than the ACA currently does, that would repeal consumer protections such as the ban of denying people coverage for pre-existing conditions. Their plan would increase deductibles and increase premiums for working families. And if that's the best that the Republicans can come up with, then I'm confident that the American people will decide that what they have now, they'd like to keep it. I also want to add that on Saturday, I joined millions of women and men across the country, across the world really, who gathered in an overwhelming display of unity. And that was a motivating experience, certainly more invigorating than the doom and gloom of the inauguration from my seat, which I noticed had noticeably low attendance. But coming from that march to today, I am disappointed that in the first days of his new presidency, President Trump is, by executive order, attempting to throw the ACA into chaos, and that the House is moving forward on a bill to restrict the health choices of women all across our country. H.R. 7 is a bill that is an assault on the constitutional right of women to choose and to decide for themselves what is best for ourselves and our families. You know, one of the things, I've been in Congress for 15 years, and one of the things that I am just completely sick and tired of is men dictating to women as if we are stupid and cannot make informed choices for ourselves. Women are responsible, women are smart, women know what is best for them, and women can make their own choices. So Republicans need to stop telling women what we can and cannot do with our bodies. And with that, I will just close by saying, the energy and the passion that I saw on Saturday is something that motivates me every day to stand up for the people that Democrats represent, which are working Americans, American families that are struggling to keep their head above water, and people who can make informed choices about what is best for them, rather than having it dictated to them by government policy. And with that, I will close and we will take questions.
Before I do open to questions, I just want to mention how proud I was of my own daughter, 16 years of age. This wasn't about democratic politics or, quite frankly, even grassroots politics or policy for her. She just simply had to be at the march. And I'm incredibly proud of my daughter, Kenzie Louise, for doing that, as well as my wife, but also my nephew up in New York felt compelled to be there. He's 17. He had to be there as well. So this is about men and women, particularly women, though, coming together, speaking out for the fear they have in this administration, as well as they're making clear that they're not prepared in any way, shape, or form to go backwards. They want to move forward. So, yes.
Good morning.
Morning.
As the Republicans try to repeal and replace Obamacare, I know your guys' position on this, and you talked about the 90 some odd votes and so on. Is there a concern maybe of Democrats overplaying their hand? What if Republicans do come up with something that ensures more folks and actually does do some things in lowering the cost and does maybe build on some of the progress that you guys would argue was made in Obamacare? And is it going to be, you guys sometimes say to the Republicans, well, just don't repeal it because it has Obama's name on it. What if we flip that argument around a little bit? What if they do come up with something? Do you think it's going to be hard to stay away from falling into that trap if they do metrically come up with something that is better?
Look, Democrats have always been about government working for and on behalf of the people. And was made note yesterday, apparently the president mentioned yesterday the note that President Obama left him. And in essence, it said if it's accessible, affordable, and comprehensive, it's actually insurance that does something. That certainly we have to look at that, and if it progresses the American people, if it's progress for the American people. But that has not been the mantra of the Republican caucus. When the president talked about insurance for all a week and a half ago, bells and alarms went off in the Republican caucus. When the president talked about allowing for Medicare to negotiate the price of prescription drugs, you'd have thought that a meteor had hit Washington, D.C., something that Democrats had been supportive of in the past. So look, in the end of the day, we Democrats, we're about advancing the American people. It's squarely on the Republican president as well as his colleagues. They now own this issue. That one of the first acts he took was to diminish and to allow for the dismantling of the Affordable Care Act. The other is he made it more expensive for people to own their home. Then he goes after the fourth estate and the media and attacks you all. He then, has just gone on and on. He's also made it clear he will not release his taxes ever, ever. No one's ever going to know what his taxes are. We don't see anything positive. We just see rolling back, and that's not acceptable to the American people.
Yeah, I'd just like to add on the specific question about a Republican plan that could potentially replace the Affordable Care Act. I have always maintained that if the Republicans can show me a plan that doesn't reduce coverage, that doesn't increase costs for families, and that provides the kind of protections that we see right now through employer-based coverage that are embedded in all of these policies, things like being able to keep your kids on your health care plan until they're 26 years old, things like no lifetime caps, because prior to ACA, even employer-based coverage, people who had health insurance through their employer were subject to some of these provisions by insurance companies, which meant if you had some kind of grave illness and you hit your cap, they spent a certain amount of money on your treatment. When you hit that cap, insurance companies could cut you loose and you were on your own. So even if you had employer-based coverage, you had no security and no peace of mind. If they can show me plans that don't cost more, that do those three things, have the appropriate safeguards so that people have real insurance, not catastrophic insurance where they pay minimal premiums, but a huge out-of-pocket costs if something really happens to them. And if they can make sure that that those plans have adequate safeguards, I'm in. I'm willing to work with you. But so far, the plans that I've seen that have been introduced by Republicans mean fewer people are covered, so you've got less coverage. It means that many of those safeguards don't exist anymore. You can't keep your kids on your policy. You can be denied insurance for pre-existing conditions. You can hit lifetime caps. And the premiums are going to go up. So why would we scrap something that has proven to be successful at doing those three things to replace it with something that is inferior? So I challenge Republicans. I'm willing to work with you. Show me your plan that does better than the ACA does right now. You know, Republicans like to talk about the fact that premiums have gone up 33% over the time that Obama has been in office. Let me remind people that in the 8 years prior to the ACA, premiums went up 53% over those years. You had double-digit increases year over year. It was unaffordable, and that's why our healthcare system was on the brink of collapse. So they may say, oh, premiums have gone up so much, 33%. Well, I'm not a math major, but 58% sounds a lot more than 33%. And yes, the price of things are going to go up. That's what inflation is. What you spent on a gallon of milk a year ago is not what you're going to spend on a gallon of milk today. But again, the Affordable Care Act has brought the cost down in terms of the trajectory. It was going up at a steep angle. It's actually brought costs down. So Republicans, show me your plan. And if it does better than the ACA, deal me in. I'm willing to work.
Do you think that Trump is making the right decision by asking James Comey to stay on as FBI director? And do you trust him to investigate any potential ties between Trump's campaign and Russia, given how Democrats think he fumbled the Hillary Clinton election?
I don't think any decision President Trump makes is rational. So to ask me that about Comey, listen, you know, many of us on our side of the aisle believe that the actions that Mr. Comey took in terms of the first announcement as well as the second announcement relating to the emails was a contributing factor in this election. When the deciding vote in 4 states is less than 0.5% collectively in those states, everything and anything contributed towards that loss. But listen, I think more importantly, having watched the president go to Langley this past weekend in front of the Wall of Honor and talk about the size of the crowd at his inaugural and dispute the numbers being reported by the press, and attack the press and the media, and later by his press secretary. You know, let's look back on the fact that when presented with the option to either believe the thousands of men and women who every day risk their lives, many of them, to gather intelligence all over the world to help the president and the leaders of our country make rational and good decisions as to how we engage with the rest of the world. He chose to put aside that intelligence and believe the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin. Now, does anyone believe that Vladimir Putin is a friend of the United States? He may not be our enemy, but he is not our friend. My Republican colleagues know that. Ask John McCain. Ask Lindsey Graham. Ask just about anyone on the Republican side of the aisle except Donald Trump. And they will tell you that Vladimir Putin is not a friend to the United States. He does not have our interests at heart. And yet, this president, when it came time to choose, he took Vladimir Putin's side over the men and women in the intelligence community, some 17 agencies. He took Vladimir Putin's side. That is incredibly disturbing to me, that the leader of our country would do that, more so than whatever decision he makes in terms of keeping Mr. Comey or anyone else in those positions. The facts are the facts, not the way in which he wants to interpret them, or alternative facts. They are what they are. We know what he did. He took Vladimir Putin's side over the intelligence community.
Do you trust Comey to accurately investigate any Trump campaign ties to Russia?
I have concern about any investigation that will go forward now, given now that he is the president of the United States. I think it's even more important now, and it's incumbent upon the intelligence community to do what's in the best interest of our country and not any individual. The president and the people within his cabinet are not above the law. They are not. He is a walking conflict of interest. He's the king of conflicts. And there are so many avenues by which I believe, and our caucus believe, and the American people believe, the intelligence community needs to go down and really be honest and straight with the American people, wherever that may lead. So we need an independent FBI. We need an independent CIA. We need an intelligence community that is independent and not coerced by the leader of our nation. They have to inform him, not the other way around.
I would just add that our democracy is founded on the idea of a system of checks and balances. And when you have one party that controls the White House, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, there are very few avenues by which you get impartiality or that system of checks and balances to work. One is the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, but we would also hope that the FBI, CIA would they are more invested in the success of this country than any one individual. I don't believe that Director Comey conducted himself during the election in a way that was impartial and beneficial to the country. I have concerns about that, but I also have concerns about who would the replacement be. Would the replacement be handpicked by the president and somebody that would be more invested in the success of the president than in the organization or the country? Those are the fears that we have. There are numerous investigations that we think are warranted, not the least of which is to try to finally, ultimately get to the bottom of what kinds of potential conflicts of interest does this president walk into the office with, because he has not released his tax returns. He has not filed his financial disclosures. And so I want to know, what are his holdings globally, and what are the potential conflicts of interest that when he walks in the room to talk with world leaders, is he doing so in a way that is going to line his own pockets or those of his friends? I think the American people deserve to know that, and I think we deserve to have independent agencies that will investigate those issues thoroughly, and again, come to a conclusion which I think puts the best interests of the country above the best interests of any one individual.
What I do think is clear is we do not want to go back to the days of J. Edgar Hoover. We want an independent agency that is working on behalf of the interests of the American people, not their self-interest, or on behalf of solely the President of the United States. Yes.
So the budget resolution set January 27th as the temporary date when they will come out with some kind of reconciliation language to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Looks like they're going to blow right past that. What does that tell you about their ability to do this without causing chaos to the insurance market?
I would just say, I've been meeting with hospital administrators, clinic administrators, constituents who are very worried about losing coverage if the Affordable Care Act is repealed. Insurance industry, it just creates a great degree of uncertainty. And again, I think it's irresponsible for the president or the Republicans in the House and Senate to talk about repeal without having a viable replacement ready and waiting in the wings. What that does is almost ensure that Americans will be subject to illness, injury, potentially lack of coverage, and that's not putting the best interests of the American people first. It's a grave issue. If you talk to those who run hospitals and run clinics, they're very concerned. And the fact that Republicans can't seem to produce a plan, again, that is a viable alternative to ACA, again, makes it incredibly, incredibly irresponsible of them to move forward on repealing ACA.
I would just add to that, you touch it, you own it. And that's what's happened now. And I think there's a difference between running for office and running a campaign to attain power, and then it's something completely different to execute. and to execute that power as well, to use that leverage. My Republican colleagues are finding that out. There's 60-plus attempts to repeal without replacing the Affordable Care Act. All of a sudden, simply repealing is no longer appealing, not only to themselves, but to the American people. And they know that, because they know all the goodies that are in there that the American people like. As Linda has said earlier, the 26 and under, your children being able to stay on your insurance. You've heard them all. Lifetime caps eliminated. The pre-existing conditions will no longer be used to discriminate, especially against women, but all people with pre-existing conditions. That wellness visits for our seniors will come to an end. You know, those free mammograms and prostate screenings and other things to help prevent disease from taking hold in the first place and costing the system more, they will all end. Healthy eating, all those kinds of programs will end. Those are the sweets, as I mentioned last week. They now have to realize and come to realization, before you get to the sweets, you have to eat your vegetables. It's a little bit difficult to get that down before you can get to the good stuff. And I think more and more Republican colleagues, and there are multiple plans. I want to thank the Fourth Estate, quite frankly, for holding their feet and they're making them accountable. We're learning what their thoughts and ideas are, not by them asking us to come into the room. No, we're both on the Ways and Means Committee. I don't think Linda's gotten an invitation. I certainly haven't gotten an invitation to go sit down with Chairman Brady or with the Speaker or with any thought leader on the Republican side on health care reform. I'm listening to and watching and reading about possible proposals, and including a high-risk pool by Speaker Ryan to deal with the issue of pre-existing conditions, but nothing to deal with lifetime caps, nothing to deal with any other aspect of the Affordable Care Act. As the gentlelady has mentioned, we know it is working. There are aspects that we've been asking our colleagues to work with to improve the Affordable Care Act over the last 6 years, and they refused every step of the way, and primarily to never ever give then President Obama a victory in any way, shape, or form. Anything would improve something that he had created or helped to create. But now, let's come back to this last point. They've touched it, and now they own it. Any changes that are made are on them. I hope on behalf of the American people that there are positive changes. I'm not holding my breath. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned on these early executive orders, you mentioned the things that you don't like, but he also pulled the United States out of the TPP, and a lot of liberal Democrats in your caucus put out statements yesterday hailing that as a great step. The fact that he very early on is sending a signal that he's not just going to toe a party line because a lot of Republicans want that to go through. Is that encouraging at all? Do you see other areas where the Democrats can work with him if he's not going to just run the conservative line?
Well, how much he actually worked with Democrats to make that executive order happen, I would question. You've heard of the term ice in the winter? TPP was dead. There was no doubt about that. It didn't get a vote under the Obama administration, the administration that actually had negotiated it. There was no foreseeable hope that TPP was coming up under this present administration. He didn't have to issue the executive order. He simply didn't have to bring it before Congress or ask Congress to vote on it. Or if it came to his desk, to veto it. He didn't do anything new yesterday. Really, it's nothing. It's just more red meat to his audience. And listen, I think many on the Democratic side of the aisle appreciate the fact that it's, but what he has said is he's going to renegotiate these deals individually in terms of bilateral agreements as opposed to multilateral agreements. Many of our side of the aisle said, that's fine. Many of our side of the aisle said, that's not fine. They don't want that either. And I think on his side of the aisle as well. So listen, what I have noticed, aside from that executive order, is the executive order that makes home ownership for new home buyers more expensive to the tune of $500 a year. What I've seen through his executive orders is the attack on the Affordable Care Act to have less access to the American people and affordability for health care. What I've seen through what he's doing, what he's saying is that he's not ever, ever, ever going to release his taxes. Ever. So we'll never know. Put aside the salacious issues that you hear. It's about what he's doing with his finances. How is he deconflicting himself? Those are the things that scare me more than anything else. With that, I just want to, Linda, do you have anything else you want to say? With that, I just want to thank you all again, to the massive crowds that are here. I just want to thank you all. I also want to make sure you know that Lauren French is now officially on. She's started yesterday's the first day. We're very pleased and happy to have her. So if you wonder how I felt about the fourth estate, well, I hired one. So thank you all very much.